Over the last 2 days, I went to 2 different music concerts. The first one was Lady Gaga's Art Rave tour, and the second one was the new Portugal the Man Evil Friends tour. And I was pretty fascinated by how different the crowds at both of these two shows were. See, one of the cool things about being a really big music fan with a really eclectic taste and liking to go to shows all the time is that I get to see a lot of different crowds at a lot of different shows. Growing up, I was a big metalhead, and I would mostly go to shows like Mastodon here, where everyone would be wearing black. There's usually just a bunch of goth girls who are dressed up in the full goth attire, dyed hair, lots of piercings, usually sort of skimpy outfits with skirts, whereas the guys were all just wearing jeans and black t-shirts, usually with a band on them, like Mastodon. And that was the typical crowd. Back then, I dressed the same. I always had a black shirt with a band on it. I had super long hair, and I loved to headbang and stuff like that. There'd always be long-haired guys everywhere. One of the cool things about going to metal shows for me back then was that it was the only place I could go, and there would be people who looked just like me. At school, I was the only guy with super long hair. I mean, my hair went down to my knees around the time that I graduated high school. And I had, a scraggly beard that was grown out, and was just kind of a chubby guy in a black t-shirt. And when I would go to metal shows, that's what everyone looked like. I'll never forget when I went to see Wolves in the Throne Room with the band Krallice up in Richmond, and the guy who was standing in front of me could have been my clone. Same height, same hair, same facial hair, same attire, looked exactly like me. Now, over time, I got into a lot of different kinds of music, started going to a lot of different shows, and I also mostly changed my appearance. I don't wear a lot of black shirts anymore. I'm wearing this one, but this is like a fitting shirt, whereas I used to wear the double XL just cause whatever. I think it's kind of common among nerdy guys and metal fans who don't really wear clothes for fashion. We tend to go for the biggest shirts because it's more comfortable. You don't feel it on you, whereas this shirt, I feel it on my chest. That's weird to me. It's not something I grew up with. Now, obviously, Lady Gaga and Portugal the Man, neither of them are metal bands. So I was interested to see not only what kind of people were going to go to these shows, but what kind of atmosphere the shows would have. Because I didn't really know anything about either audience. I've never been to a show for either of these artists before. I've been a fan of Portugal the Man for a long time, but they changed so dramatically over the course of the last 6 years, both in terms of their audience and their sound, that I was really curious as to what kind of people would go to a Portugal the Man show. When Portugal the Man started, I believe the founding members had been in a post-hardcore or screamo band, and they toured with mostly bands from those genres. I remember they toured with Circle Takes the Square, who are a really intense screamo band, and they toured with them in 2006, and Portugal the Man started off sounding like experimental rock, but they didn't really fall in with the screamo genre at all, or the post-hardcore genre. They were sort of their own thing. They were more of a straight-up rock outfit, but with enough experimental weird stuff that you wouldn't really see them getting radio play or anything. And then over the years, they transformed into this folksy jam band kind of thing, and now they're more of a radio rock band. Their latest album, Evil Friends, some people compare it to the likes of Foster the People, so it's a totally different sound from what they started with, and only as they've evolved their sound have they started to grow big. So the kind of thought I'm having is, who's going to be at this Portugal the Man show? Will it be longtime fans? Will it be new fans? Will anyone know their old material? Will they play any old material? And it turns out that the kind of people who show up at Portugal the Man are pretty much all college kids. Now, that might not be surprising because college kids are at a lot of shows, but if you go to enough shows that aren't college kid aimed, then it's almost odd, where I'm used to, again, goth kids or people who might dress a little bit more outlandishly, and this was just normal looking people who all looked like they were in their early 20s. A lot of big dudes, dudes, dude bro guys, college guys, people who look like they were probably athletic or work out and stuff like that. A lot of them are very tall at this show. There was a lot of girls there too. Either they were fans of the band, or there was girls who seemed to be dragging their boyfriends along, guys who were dragging their girlfriends along. It pretty much went every way in terms of gender. And this wasn't a uniform show where everyone was kind of the same. There was a pretty decent variety. The girls in front of me were a lesbian couple. There were some diverse ethnic groups, but it was almost all white people. The vast majority was white people, but there were some Asian and other ethnicities there as well. I think maybe 1 or 2 black guys. But altogether, I would characterize it as a very straight, white, college-aged show. And then to be on the complete opposite end of the spectrum would be Lady Gaga's show. Lady Gaga was performing at the Verizon Center in Washington, D.C., which is in the middle of like D.C.'s Chinatown area. And my brother and I showed up pretty early because we had driven all the way up from Virginia Beach, which for those who don't have any idea the context of that, that's about 4.5 hours. And so we showed up early and there was a lot of people lined up already, you know, because they had come from out of town, so they'd just been standing in line all day. And it quickly became apparent that everyone in the line was dressed up like they were going to a rave, be it that they were wearing like the gothy raver gear or just weird eclectic outfits or glitter or sparkles or something fashionable, because Lady Gaga sings about fashion a lot, so I expected there to be some fashion, but like I was really not ready for just how much it would be. And then once we were actually in line, because we walked around the town for a while and then we got in line, and it slowly became apparent that it was all gay men and women, like young women and gay men, literally the entire line. Now, I'm not trying to make any kind of stereotype about gay men, but every flavor of gay man that I could imagine was there. There were gay men who were dressed normally, but I could tell they were gay from either the way they were talking, the fact that they were with boyfriends, or, you know, with hugging and kissing other men, or because they had a gay-sounding voice. And don't try to tell me that there's no such thing as a gay-sounding voice, because there totally is. My voice sounds a little gay myself, but I somehow was the straightest guy at the Lady Gaga show. That's saying something coming from me. But it was totally rad, because there were just gay dudes everywhere, and I've never even seen that many gay dudes in one place, and it was awesome. And a lot of them were wearing crazy outfits. There was a lot of guys in drag, and I mean like every kind of drag. There were guys in every manner of exuberant costume, and most importantly, everyone there in that line was a huge Gaga fan. Like, no question, everyone there was really into Lady Gaga. A lot of them had the makeup that she has in the Applause album art, where she has like splotches of makeup all over her face. A lot of people came with that. There were people who had, you know, song titles written on their jackets and stuff, people carrying signs, just anything that you could think of to do with Lady Gaga's music. And so these people were very ready for a Gaga show. Now, we were on the ground level, which is like the floor area, and Gaga had this crazy ass set where she had like walkways going out through the crowd on the ground level. The position me and my brother actually ended up in was under one of the walkways, and you could see through it. So we spent a lot of time at like pooch shot of Lady Gaga walking over us, which was funny. But all the guys in the pit were all gay guys, with the exception of like maybe 2 or 3 guys who might have been straight, and even then I can't say for sure, but they just didn't strike me as like openly gay. A lot of the girls there were gay too. I saw a number of lesbian couples together. There was just a lot of young girls in the crowd as well. But then when it got really interesting was when I looked up into the seats, because again, we were down in the pit, but there was a lot of seats at this place. I mean, the place is fucking enormous. Now, the seat tickets were a little bit more expensive than the pit tickets. I don't know why you'd pay more and get in the seats. I guess the view is better because you can see the whole setup, as opposed to having times like where I was under the bridge and couldn't really see, because she would walk around this huge stage a lot, and it was so expansive that you were always going to be at a bad angle at some point if you were in the pit. But everyone in the pit just seemed so hardcore. Like, all of them were so into Gaga that it meant something personal to them. A lot of the people down there were the ones who threw up letters on stage, because there's like a point in the show where I guess she probably had put out some kind of notification to like certain group of fans that if you threw letters on stage, she might read them or like invite you backstage. So a lot of people threw up letters, and the letters that she read, both of them were from gay men who had difficulty coming out, and Lady Gaga's music helped them to. Like, listening to Born This Way had helped them to gain the courage to come out and be who they are. So, you know, there's a lot of people down there who have been legitimately touched by Lady Gaga's music that's helped them with their lives. And then I looked up into the seats, and it was a totally different crowd. Whereas the pit was mostly gay men and women of every ethnicity imaginable, up in the seats was mostly older white people or like families, like where kids had dragged their parents along, you know, like, Daddy, can I go to Gaga? And then they came together kind of thing. Or just older people in general, and mostly white from what I could tell. I mean, for the record, I didn't always see them that well because the lights are dim at a show like this. But every time I looked up, it mostly looked like either young women or older people who were with young women, or just older people who were there to see Gaga because they're fans of it. So I just thought it was interesting. I mean, typically older people are more likely to go to a show with seats anyway, because they don't necessarily want to stand and jump and rave the whole time. Down in the pit, it was a constant party the whole Gaga show. I jumped more times than I've ever jumped before at a show because every single song is a high energy rave song. All the hands are in the air, everyone's jumping and bouncing and singing along, and it's a big happy time. So if you're older and you don't necessarily want to be a part of that, maybe not in the best physical condition, then you might not want to be down in the pit. One time my brother and I saw Steely Dan live, and we had pit tickets for it. Basically, the place that we went had a giant pit, and the pit had seats. You could not really stand at the Steely Dan concert. I don't mean that these seats were already there. I mean, they had carted out fold-out chairs and filled the pit with fold-out chairs. And it became apparent that the reason is that everyone at Steely Dan was old people. Like, my brother and I were two of maybe 1 to 5% of the crowd that was younger. Everyone else was older, because Steely Dan's been around forever, so it's not really surprising, but it was interesting to go to a show that's all old people where standing up is like frowned upon at this show. It was totally awkward for me because I'm used to standing up at every show, and I'm usually that guy who's going wild at the show. It's safe to say that no matter how into Gaga the people around us were at Lady Gaga, my brother and I were still going harder than everyone else in the crowd in terms of our hype level and just getting into the energy of it, which is crazy because my brother doesn't even listen to Lady Gaga, and he was still totally high energy for the show and loved it. Portugal the Man was interesting because the crowd was really into it, but it's not the kind of music you can really do anything to. It's not throw your hands up music, it's not jump around music, it's more just groovy music. You had a lot of people just sort of dancing to themselves, grooving out. Everyone knew the words to most of the songs, so clearly it was a pretty decently dedicated crowd. And they mostly played songs from their latest album, but they also played a little bit of stuff from their older ones, and everyone seemed to know it as well. So it was actually a pretty well-acquainted crowd to their music, which was surprising considering that they only recently got big. And I have been to shows where the crowd clearly did not know the older material of the band and mostly knew their newer singles. I remember when I saw Coldplay live because my dad had won tickets for it and he brought me along because my mom was like, hell no, I don't want to go see Coldplay. And I went, and it was all like white collar white people. Everyone there was either older but not older like Steely Dan older where they were like literally middle-aged or older. This was more like 30-something family man and wife kind of show. There's a lot of families at Coldplay as well, but what struck me about Coldplay was the first concert that I had been to at the time where no one was wearing black. And I was used to going to shows where everyone was wearing black. I went to see Mindless Self-Indulgence a couple months ago, and it was mostly, punk kids, like people with mohawks or piercings all over. And there was a lot of people who were just more normally dressed like me, because MSI has a pretty broad audience, but definitely the people I expected to be there were there, the punks and the really out there appearances. So what I've gotten out of all of this is that going to shows, people treat it really as a form of self-expression. Lady Gaga pretty much said this in her show. I think the phrasing she used was, if you haven't been yourself lately, this is a place where you can let it all out. Or no, she said where you can check yourself. Like, the point of Lady Gaga's show was this is a place where you can acceptably dress up however you want and, go as hard as you can, and you're going to feel at home. That was what I loved about it. Even though I wasn't dressed up, and if I had known the kind of show it was going to be, I probably would have put on something more bizarre just to do it. But I just loved that idea that everyone there felt so comfortable and at home being dressed this way. It made me feel like I was in a good place. I liked this crowd. I was like, I'm glad to be with these people who I think are really expressing themselves and are very passionate about this music. A lot of the Portugal the Man crowd, while most of them did seem to know the music pretty well, there was a lot of people who were obviously dragged there by their friends, because it's more of a low-end show, it's sort of cheap, and they had sold out the place. There's a ton of people there, but my brother said that there were people who would leave after they had already heard the songs they wanted to hear, or just didn't care that much, or were, kind of jokingly dancing. Lady Gaga was no such story. Everyone there was a hardcore fan, which they'd have to be because the tickets were fucking expensive, but nonetheless, it was cool to see that. And that kind of energy from a crowd can make a show. The best show I've ever been to was the band Boris performing the song Flood, which is like a drony ambient post-rock song that's like an hour long. And at that show, everyone there clearly was well aware of this song. The show was Boris Performs Flood. Everyone knew what they were getting themselves into, and they're such an obscure band, and they were playing in such an obscure location that everyone there had to be a fan of Boris and the album Flood. So when they performed it, there was a sort of energy where, even though Boris is not the kind of band that has a certain crowd that follows it, everyone there was just dressed normally. No one stood out. There was no one kind of person at the Boris show. I wouldn't say it was especially college. I wouldn't say it was especially this or that. It was just a bunch of people who were really into Boris. But all of them, everyone seemed to know exactly what they were supposed to be feeling from this song. Everyone was sort of bobbing their heads in the same way, moving the same way, lifting their hands at the right times. Everyone knew the words, even though no one really knows the words because it's like in Japanese and there's no real transcription of the lyrics, but everyone was trying to sing along. And that level of passion from the crowd made that show really awesome. To hear such a gorgeous song, and to hear that song live is magical, and to have the crowd understand it so well made that my favorite show. I really do think a crowd can make or break a show. For instance, the band Opeth, their live shows are usually awkward because they switch constantly between playing heavy metal and really soft passages, and you have about half the crowd who really gets Opeth's music and likes both the heavy and the soft, and then you've got the guys who are like there because they want to get drunk and mosh, and then they'll be like, headbanging and getting into it during the metal parts, and then they get completely bored during the soft parts. There's always people checking their phones or talking during the calmer parts of Opeth songs, and then the other people who are mad at them. There was almost like a fight at the last Opeth show I went to because some dude was talking over the music and some girl was like, "Shut the fuck up," during the soft part of a song. It's just awkward to go there because they've also got like 10 albums and everyone has different favorites. So, I'm sitting there like, oh, I hope they play that song off of Watershed. And the guy next to me is like, oh, Orchid's their only good album, So you don't get that kind of crowd togetherness and synergy. Whereas at Lady Gaga, I was actually worried because her new album Art Pop is pretty different from her older stuff, and I wasn't sure if people would be as into it. But it was the Art Pop tour, people knew what they were getting into, and everyone knew her new material as well as her old material. So it was a cool show to go to. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this sort of experimental vlog. I don't really know if there was a direct topic to this, but I just thought it was interesting to crowd watch at different shows, going to all these different concerts and seeing the different people who are there. And if you have any experiences like this where you went to a show and you were surprised by what kind of people were there, then by all means, share your stories. I don't know how many of you actually go to shows, but I'd be interested to find out.